Ecuador's National Electoral Council began sending electoral documents abroad ahead of the second round of presidential elections. Peruvian President Dina Boluarte will appear before the public prosecutor's office investigating her alleged responsibility for the deaths of civilians during protests against her government. And Russian Defense Minister reveals Ukraine has lost more than 17,000 soldiers so far this month. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Ana Rosabal from the teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We'll begin with the news. Ecuador's National Electoral Council confirmed it began sending electoral documents abroad to guarantee the in-person voting of migrants called to the second round of the early presidential elections. As detailed by the electoral body, more than 600 ballot boxes, 1,172 screens, and 635 packages of electoral documents are being sent to the areas abroad, so that 409,250 citizens may exercise their right to vote next Sunday, October 15. The registered voters will elect at the polls the new president who will lead the country until May 2025, after the government activated the so-called Death Cross, which dissolved the National Assembly. The election for national and foreign legislators would also be repeated, after the voting of August 20 was annulled due to problems with the digital platform enabled by the National Electoral Council for telematic voting. In Ecuador, the National Union of Educators, Pensioners Associations, and Workers hold a rally in front of the Constitutional Court to reject the public finance law. The union said that the decree law presented by President Guillermo Lasso seeks to cut the education and health budgets. In addition, the Union of Educators indicated that the law will eliminate the state's obligation to pay 40% of the resources to Ecuadorian Social Security institutes. On Tuesday, the Constitutional Court will hold a public hearing to consider the arguments of both representatives of the Lasso administration and civil society on the law. In Argentina, authorities in Buenos Aires recognized 18 indigenous communities that were granted legal status. The Provincial Council of Indigenous Affairs of the Undersecretary of Human Rights of the province of Buenos Aires indicated that the purpose of the ceremony is to make visible the struggle and work of the native peoples. The measure provides the possibility for the state to recognize the demands of the indigenous communities, in addition to advancing the different projects that they have. The initiative corresponds to the state of Buenos Aires, where at least 500,000 people who identify themselves as indigenous live. In Peru, President Dina Boluarte will appear on September 27 before the police prosecutor's office that is investigating her alleged responsibility for the deaths of civilians during protests against her government. This will be the second time that the head of state appears in a hearing of this investigation. The first one took place on June 6, when Boluarte answered some questions from the police prosecutor's office, although she remained in silence before the questions of the Attorney's General Office and the victims' defense lawyers. The investigation is to hold Boluarte accountable for deaths of civilians during the anti-government and anti-Congress demonstrations that took place between December 2022 and February 2023. The protests demanded the resignation of Boluarte and the current Congress and the holding of general elections. Canada's Speaker of the House of Commons, Anthony Rocha, announced on Tuesday that he will be resigning from his position following the scandal around the invitation and recognition of Ukrainian Nazi veteran Yaroslav Hunka. Hunka, a 98-year-old Ukrainian Nazi veteran who fought in the ranks of the 14th Waffen Grenadier Division of the Nazi SS during World War II, was given a standing ovation by the entire Canadian legislature on Friday. The recognition of Hunka came as the Speaker of the House of Commons, Anthony Rocha, delivered opening remarks before the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's address to the Canadian Parliament. On Sunday, Rocha apologized for his decision to invite Hunka, and Trudeau's office said it was unaware of the invitation to Hunka. Rocha reiterated his regret over the invitation and recognition of Hunka, a decision that caused pain to Jewish communities and survivors of Nazi atrocities in Poland, among other countries.
It's with a heavy heart that I rise to inform members of my resignation as Speaker of the House of Commons. I reiterate my profound regret for my error in recognizing an individual in the House during the joint address to Parliament of President Zelensky. That public recognition has caused pain to individuals and communities, including the Jewish community in Canada and around the world, in addition to survivors of Nazi atrocities in Poland, among other nations. I accept full responsibility for my actions.
Trinidad and Tobago has been in the petroleum sector for over 100 years, developing considerable onshore and shallow water oil and gas exploration activity, with cumulative production of over 3 billion barrels of oils. As the largest producer of oil and natural gas in the Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago's hydrocarbon sector transitioned from an oil-dominated sector to a primarily natural gas-based sector in the early 1990s. Trinidad and Tobago is home to one of the largest natural gas processing facilities in the Western Hemisphere. The energy sector accounts for about 34.9% of the country's GDP. The energy sector continues to be an integral part of the country's economic growth and long-term development, contributing significantly to the government revenues, exports, earnings, and GDP. To help us better understand this issue, we have a guest in our channel, that's River. He's the Director General of the Trinidad and Tobago Energy Chamber. The Energy Chamber is a membership organization representing some 400 companies in Trinidad and Tobago's energy sector, ranging from small family-owned contractors to major international operating companies in both the upstreams and petrochemical sectors. Welcome.
Thank you.
Considering that Trinidad and Tobago is an island in the Caribbean, what is the state of the gas industry and how have you positioned yourself in the global market?
Well, so as you were just introducing, Trinidad and Tobago, obviously we have a very long history in the oil and gas industry, very different from other Caribbean islands, which are mostly dominated by tourism. We're dominated by the energy industry. So we've been in this thing for more than a century, and from the 60s onwards, natural gas, and then really natural gas really took off in the 1990s. Started off with onshore production, and then it's moved offshore, and now we're moving into the deeper waters. I think what we have is a really well-developed petrochemical sector and an LNG export sector, and we export product from those from the petrochemical plants in Point Lisas, from the Atlantic facility, LNG facility, all around the world. We are a major exporter of LNG, we're a major exporter of ammonia, which mostly goes into fertilizers, and a major exporter of methanol, which is one of the basic building blocks of many of the chemicals and increasingly low carbon fuel. We also export LPG, butane and propane. Most of that goes around the region. And the other thing I'd highlight is that we use natural gas in our electricity sector. 100% of our electricity comes from natural gas, which has given us a very stable and competitive electricity utility as well, which I think is a big benefit for the country. We were a decade ago producing about 4 billion cubic feet of natural gas a day. About half of that went into LNG, about 40% into the petrochemicals, and about 10% into the electricity sector, which mostly used in the domestic economy. But our gas production has fallen. It's fallen from 4 BCF a decade ago to now under 3 BCF. So the immediate issue for Trinidad and Tobago is how do we turn around that production and increase it, and then longer term, obviously, all these issues around the energy transition and how do we decarbonize our production as well. So those are the sort of the major issues that we're facing.
And there is evidence that gas revenues are important in terms of GDP. What is the effects of this income on key sectors like education, health, and social welfare of the population?
Well, so our gas industry obviously creates a lot of revenue for the government. It creates opportunities for companies, for private sector companies, and it produces well-paying jobs as well. So Trinidad has a low unemployment rate, under 5%. I think it's one of the lowest in the region. We have a small population, only 1.2 million people, and a pretty high GDP per capita which the sector has really given us with about $18,000 per capita is our GDP. We have good access to electricity, 100% access to electricity, good access to LPG, cooking gas for all households at pretty cheap prices. We have free health services. We've invested a lot in education. There's free education right the way through secondary school and subsidized education, free means-tested education in two good universities. And we have a lot of technical schools as well. So that's given us a sort of a very well-educated population and a lot of trained employees in the energy sector. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like a paradise. We have our problems as well, like everywhere else. Crime is obviously an issue which many countries in the region are facing. But the energy sector has been good to the country.
And also in September, your country signed an agreement with Venezuela to promote joint projects in the gas and hydrocarbon sector. Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago share an important maritime border rich in gas and hydrocarbons. What are the benefits that these agreements can bring to the national industry from your point of view, and what would be the impact on the region?
So I think really the key here is the issue I was discussing before, how Trinidad's domestic gas production has declined from 4 BCF a day to now below 3. So that means we have a lot of processing infrastructure, petrochemical plants, LNG facilities, which are all available to be used if we can get more gas available into the country. So if we can import natural gas, say from Venezuela, that means that we can use that, and then it creates a route to the international markets for that natural gas. We talk about regionally. There's a regional impact. We do sell a lot of our products into regional markets. Our LNG goes into Central America. A lot goes to the Dominican Republic and Jamaica. In the hemisphere, Brazil and Argentina and Chile, also we sell LNG into there as well. Recent years, it's quite a lot been going into Europe, in Spain in particular. So the more LNG we can process through our facilities, obviously it's good for us, but it also makes the LNG available to the world as well, to regional markets and international markets as well. The LPG, the liquids which get produced along with the natural gas, that's obviously a good regional market for that. And there's a big demand for cooking gas around the Caribbean and Central America and South America. So that's something which I think is good to offer. And really, what I think that importing natural gas by pipeline from Venezuela would allow Trinidad to do is to continue in the industry, and that would allow us then to make those investments into greening our gas production. Obviously, we're proud that we are a natural gas economy. Gas being in terms of climate change one of the cleaner fossil fuels, or the cleanest fossil fuel, but also allows us then to transition while we are continuing with the industry into green hydrogen and lower carbon products. That'll take time, so we need to continue the industry as we're doing that.
Dax Driver, Director General of the Energy Chamber of Trinidad and Tobago from teleSUR in English, thank you for your time, for answering our questions.
Thank you.
And let's take a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at teleSUR English, where you'll find news in different formats, new dates, some more. All the studies coming up. Stay with us. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu revealed at a meeting of ministry officials on Tuesday that Ukraine has lost more than 70,000 soldiers so far this month. Shoigu claimed that the Ukrainian military continues to suffer heavy losses almost 4 months into his much-hyped counteroffensive. The minister added that Ukraine has also parted with more than 2,700 pieces of military equipment over the same period. According to Shoigu, Ukrainian forces have still failed to achieve any major successes on the battlefield despite the heavy losses. Kiev launched its counteroffensive in early June, but according to Moscow, it has failed to make any tangible gains since it began. In early September, Shoigu said that Ukraine had lost more than 66,000 troops and over 7,600 pieces of heavy equipment since the start of the operation. The new update brings the figures to 83,000 and 10,300 respectively.
parties continue to provide weapons to the Ukrainian armed forces. And the Kiev regime throws untrained soldiers into senseless assaults to slaughter. Such cynical actions of the West and their minions in Kiev only push Ukraine towards self-destruction. Under these conditions, we continue to increase the combat power of the armed forces, including the supply of modern weapons and improving the training of troops. Taking into account the experience of the special military operation, consistent implementation of the action plan until 2025 will make it possible to achieve the intended goals.
In France, on Tuesday, the rebel transport union CGT Cheminots, Sudrail, and CFDT Cheminots called a strike to denounce the transfer of employees to subsidiaries. The union mobilization also protests against the dismantling of the company FTS NCF in a discontinuity plan prepared by the government for the European Commission, with the elimination of 500 jobs out of the 5,000 railway workers out of the SNCF group, and the cessation of the operation of all combined trains that were transferred to the private sector. In January, the European Commission opened an investigation into the financial support provided by the French state to Fred's SNCF between 2007 and 2019, in particular the cancellation of a debt of 5.3 billion euros. Brussels could declare this aid illegal, which could lead to the automatic bankruptcy of Fred's SNCF, unable to repay it.
Everyone will have understood that if we want to have a truly ecological policy, we'll have to develop free transport. And today, just as a world, we have a company called Fred SNCF, and what the government is doing in a way that completely contradicts all these statements, so-called sustainable development ecology, is that, on the one hand, it talks about ecology, and on the other hand, there is the public instrument, which is Fred SNCF, and it is cutting its wings, quite simple, by cutting jobs, 500 jobs. So I'd like someone to explain to me how they are going to develop the freight business, starting with cutting 500 jobs in the SNCF freight sector by opening up the capital. So it is just diplomacy, not to say privatization. We've seen what happens when motorways are privatized, and we've seen what happens when EDF opens up its capital to competition. It weakens the sector. That's why we're here today, to call on the public, the elected representative, and the railway workers, because of course we are going to create subsidiaries and we are going to be transferred to subsidiaries, so we are undermining the social rights of the SNCF freight workers, so we are weakening the sector.
Thousands of Armenian refugees fled Nagorno-Karabakh on Tuesday as authorities in the war-torn breakaway state of Azerbaijan raised the death toll from a fuel explosion. Armenian Health Minister Anahit Abanesian announced on Tuesday that a total of 125 people were killed in the explosion that occurred the day before in a gasoline depot near the town of Stepanakert in the Nagorno-Karabakh region, which resulted in a large fire. Most of the victims were refueling for the journey through the so-called Lashin corridor, which connects the impoverished and historically disputed region with Armenia. We have come to the end of this news brief. You can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For Telesur English, I'm Ana Rosabal. Thank you for watching.